Hello, everyone, and welcome to Session 5, Reading Comprehension of our Middle School and High School Literacy Teacher Professional Development Series. My name is Natalie Kleber, and I am in charge of Middle School and High School Literacy PD here at the Louisiana Department of Education. And we have been discussing in our previous sessions about the science of reading. We had some sessions on morphology, fluency, and then now we're diving into reading comprehension. And this is a general session about reading comprehension. We have 3 sessions coming after this with specific strategies that you can use to help. But first, we need to understand what reading comprehension is and what affects reading comprehension and how to build it before we jump into the use of those strategies. So just to recap, in our last session, we spent time examining what makes a student a fluent reader. And we discussed how to improve fluency in the middle school and high school classroom. We talked about there are definitely opportunities for that to happen, that exposure to different text and practicing those different texts and giving constructive and frequent feedback to students as they read helps to build fluent readers. Today's objective is that by the end of the session, you will be able to define reading comprehension and why it is a complex process. And you're going to describe the skills that make up reading comprehension and what is required to be an effective comprehender of text. So text comprehension is a dynamic and interactive process. It involves several sources of information and knowledge. And I want you just to think about, just real quick, even as you're reading the slide, what exactly is happening in your brain that allows you not to just to decode the words, but to understand what I'm really saying or what the words really say and how complex that process is. By acknowledging that and what makes this up allows us to help reinforce students who need more support in reading comprehension. And this is a quote by Kate Kane. It says, "Successful comprehension of written text enables the reader to acquire and apply new knowledge, to experience other fictional worlds, and to communicate successfully and to attain academic success." And so the ability to read and comprehend doesn't just help students inside the classroom, but it helps them throughout their lifetimes and not just experience other fictional worlds, but just all kinds of worlds present, picking up an informational text and learning how to do something for the first time isn't fictional, but it's very powerful and it holds power. So just referring back to our Scarbo's reading rope, really reading comprehension, all of top and bottom really play a part in reading comprehension. But if we can say that the lower strand is increasingly automatic, if we can say that students do have phonological awareness capabilities, they are decoding, and they do have sight recognition, then if we work on the upper strand, we can continue to develop their reading comprehension. So background knowledge, vocabulary, language structure, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge all play a part in students' ability to read and comprehend, specifically comprehend text, because that top component is their language comprehension. And language consists of more than just print, of course. So even students who struggle to read and comprehend still might be able to listen and comprehend, or vice versa. They might be able to listen and comprehend, but they still struggle to read and comprehend. So we're going to talk more about the different parts of the upper strand and what role they play in reading comprehension. And then we'll talk about some things that we can do to help support reading comprehension. So background knowledge. Studies have consistently shown that students with a greater amount of background knowledge tend to be stronger at reading comprehension than those with a more limited background knowledge. And so this is why it's so important for us to have these robust Tier 1 curricula that help build students' background knowledge and to give them opportunities in class to read and discuss different topics so that they can help build their reading comprehension. Building a broad base of knowledge with your students is a crucial component of good reading instruction. So it's not just, like I said, the words on the page. It's building this knowledge around the topic that you're discussing to help improve their background knowledge. As you build their knowledge base, they're able to think, speak about, and write about many different topics. But more importantly, to develop that background knowledge, using these different components of literacy to help build it. So we should be reading to build our background knowledge. We should be writing about topics to build our background knowledge after we have some some clue about what they're about, we should be speaking about them. One of the best ways to build language comprehension is to allow students to have those discussions, those turn and talks, those different teacher moves that we can put in to help develop their background knowledge through discussion. Many of our widely used curricula have a focus on building a wide knowledge base among students. So we acknowledge that this is an area that needs to be reinforced, and that is the purpose of that. So vocabulary is also essential to reading and comprehending. And the average student learns about 3,000 to 4,000 new words a year, and the majority of that is learned indirectly. So what that means is we don't have vocabulary definitions and words up and we're making them memorize. This is just indirect learning through reading, through having those discussions. But some vocabulary does need to be taught explicitly as well. And there's many places that we can do that. I have some upcoming sessions about vocabulary coming, but morphology sessions 1 and 2, parts 1 and 2 is a great way to help reinforce that vocabulary. In science and math, we want to be careful that we're not front loading that tier 3, what we call tier 3 or academic vocabulary, but maybe there's a need after with students who need more support to dive into the morphology of those words after they've already experienced the learning. Vocabulary is also acquired through conversations, through read alouds, and through independent reading. There are multiple opportunities to build tier 2 vocabulary for students to interact on a deeper level within the secondary grades. And so I refer to tier 3 vocabulary as being your academic. So these are your words like triangle, photosynthesis, antebellum. There's a lot of tier 2 words, though, that if we provide direct and explicit instruction on, students will be able to better engage in our activities in class and the text that we're using. And these are words like analyze and synthesis and divulge, like just all the different words they need to engage in the learning. And there are multiple lists out there by grade level that talk about tier 2 vocabulary. But if you use some of those words, if you look at the list and you use those words often, it would really behoove you to kind of give some direct and explicit instruction to students so they can, you'll see the payoff with them engaging in their lessons. Language structure is another strand in our rope, and good language comprehension also requires an awareness of and skill with syntax. And syntax is the rules that determine how sentences are structured. We have our nouns, we have our verbs, we have our adjectives and our adverbs, the role that punctuation plays in that. Syntactic awareness refers to the ability to monitor the relationships among the words in a sentence in order to understand while reading or composing orally or in writing. Poor syntactic awareness will also negatively impact reading comprehension. This is often a particularly challenging area for English language learners whose home language may have different syntactic patterns. And so in some languages, the noun does not come before the verb, or the adjective does not become before the noun, or some sentences don't even require maybe a noun or a verb. So understanding that and building on that will help our English language learners just become more proficient with the English language structures. Verbal reasoning is another strand, and it refers to understanding what you read by making connections to what you already know, by inferencing, understanding metaphors, and being able to draw conclusions from the text. So as we're reading, we're seeing these words. You know, we have to understand what the words mean, the vocabulary of the words, but we also have to be able to, for what we're reading to truly stick, we have to make connections, a connection to something. When a connection is made, it sticks with us. So we have to make a connection to something we already know. We have to be able to infer what the author is trying to get us to understand. Otherwise, we're not comprehending the whole message, we're comprehending a part of it. And we have to understand the use of these literary devices like metaphors so that we can pull from that. And there's expressions that we use in the English language that not everyone may be familiar with. And so exposing students and explaining this to students so they can build their comprehension through that as well. Verbal reasoning is a dominant component in secondary text and curriculum. There's a whole lot that's happening with those different literary devices. Verbal reasoning tests are often part of applying for a job and entrance exams to get into college. And so verbal reasoning plays a part in not just within your curriculum and in your course of study, but it plays an even larger part in student success after high school. And so whether they're applying for that job or they're applying to get into college, strengthening students' ability to reason verbally is really going to help to play a huge part in their success. Literacy knowledge is the last strand. And so literacy knowledge consists of print concepts, such as the message being delivered in the text. So the way that we read a menu versus the way that we read a book is different. With a menu, we're starting from the top, we're kind of going down. We're still reading left to right, but there's a different purpose in them writing that. The directionality of print. And so understanding that we read from left to right. Distinction between words, phrases, and sentences. And so some students may need more support in understanding how words interact with each other to build meaning, and being able to take those words in that sentence and connecting it to the next sentence, and understanding that there's a connection there that builds on those ideas and the comprehension within them. Literacy knowledge also consists of different genres of writing and the author's purpose. And it's really important because purposes build as students get older. And so in grades 6 through 12, bias becomes a huge part of what they're reading and discussing even. And so if they understand that, then that affects their comprehension as well. The purpose is no longer just to inform. There's a lot of persuasion happening. There's argumentative pieces that they're trying to prove their point and get you to understand their claim and their counterclaim. And so understanding these things definitely helps aid reading comprehension. So these are some different characteristics of strong reading comprehenders. Good comprehenders are able to perform integration and inference. And so they're able to integrate ideas that are happening within that sentence with ideas that are happening across sentences, across paragraphs, and even across authors. And they're also to build, like we talked about in the previous slides, they're also able to build on inferences that the author is making. Good comprehenders also monitor their own comprehension. As they're reading, you're not even thinking about it. It's happening subconsciously, but you're making connections to things you already know. You're asking yourselves questions very rapidly about, does this make sense? What is the author trying to tell us? How does this character interacting with that? What's going to happen next? We're asking ourselves these internal questions in our heads and monitoring our own comprehension. Good comprehenders also have knowledge and use of text structure. And so there are macro structures of a text. So for instance, a narrative is constructed much differently than a research paper, or is constructed much differently than an informational text. And understanding that, good comprehenders have knowledge of that, and they're able to extract meaning from that and apply meanings differently because the structure of the text is different. And it's really important to draw attention to text structures, not just inside of English language arts, but in all of our disciplines, because if students are told this is how it's structured and why, whether it's a science text or a social studies text or even a math problem, then they're able to understand why it's structured that way, and it's going to help them extract meaning more proficiently down the road. Good comprehenders also have, they're able to perform well in their short and long-term memory. And so there are supports that we can build in at all of these different levels. And it's kind of just really about determining where the need is right now and building past that. So we're going to dive into some of that in some of those future sessions. So what are some consequences of being a weak comprehender? So weak comprehenders might have lifelong difficulties with reading. They're going to lack the motivation to leisurely read, just to read for fun. They might, because they don't want to read as often, maybe they have less practice inward reading and comprehension. So that elicits fewer opportunities to acquire new vocabulary and new knowledge to continue building their knowledge. It may impair the ability to learn more generally. And these students are going to have generally lower scores on tests. So spotting a weak comprehender might not be super obvious. Students may read fluently and accurately, but still not be able to comprehend. And sometimes in my class, I've noticed that these students, and this is not always, but they read very quickly sometimes. Like they were extremely fluent, almost too fluent, like they're reading and reading and reading and reading, but they're not having enough pause, punctuation or different ideas to process what they're reading. So these students may struggle to answer questions based on the text, especially questions that are beyond basic recall. So if you have your questions posed either verbally or on the board, and these are the students that maybe when you call on them are going to have trouble answering consistently, not just in one text or one instance, but across different opportunities. These are students who are producing poorly structured written and oral narratives. Because if we struggle to read and comprehend, sometimes we need more support in encoding as well and writing it out. So these are students who might see a lot of simple sentences. She went to the store. She went to get eggs. She went, because they don't have a lot of knowledge maybe, or need support, more support around maybe syntax or different language structures. So now that we know what makes up reading comprehension and we're able to spot maybe somebody who needs additional support around reading comprehension, let's talk about how to build strong comprehenders. So because it's such a complex process, there is no one magical strategy, but there are ways to help build comprehension skills in students, many different ways. So that's the great news. Some different ways are maybe summarizing what has been read. As students build their ability to summarize text, it helps them to read and comprehend better, because they're constantly asking themselves, okay, what did I just read about? Who was in that? What was happening? How did that impact something that happened later? Generating questions to monitor comprehension is another way to build strong comprehenders. This needs to be done by the students, though. It's not the teacher building the questions, it's the students. And so we're going to talk later, but a good close reading strategy is a great way to help students, like in the margin, write their questions and monitor and answer them as they go. Using context clues to make inferences. That's something that we can do, helping them to use those context clues. Combining lexical inference and question generation. And so the ability to read and then to generate a question based on what you read, both happening at the same time. Offering several opportunities to communicate to build background knowledge or oral comprehension. So if we have comprehension problems in general, definitely starting with the oral component and then building into the reading component can sometimes help springboard that. It's really just so important. After we deliver the new learning, after you have given them whatever new learning they need, it's really important to allow them the opportunity to process that information. And sometimes to process it, it goes straight to pen and paper. Maybe it's to automatically work a problem or to automatically start writing. But sometimes the idea is so complex, or they don't have the background knowledge they need, and that they need to keep processing the information before they go to application of that skill. And so, like I said, those turn and talks, the share outs, there's so many different teacher moves that you can use that are discussion based, but that's why these are so powerful, because this will build better oral comprehension, which can help synthesize into reading comprehension as well. So what does reading comprehension instruction look like? First of all, there's no outside program that you're going to do. You're going to live within your curriculum that you're already teaching, but you're just going to add some teacher moves on top of that to help them process the curriculum and what they're reading. So summarizing, you can do this whole class within the curriculum. They have a passage or they have a piece of text, and you're teaching them how to summarize. The next session of our middle school and high school literacy PD series is going to show how to build comprehension through summaries. A close reading strategy. So if you don't have a close reading strategy, I encourage you to get one, but specifically one that allows students to build questions in the margins to guide their understanding is really powerful for all students, but especially students who don't have that intrinsically and who need more support in that area. Building knowledge of context clues. So as you're reading and you are reading something and you say, aha, in your own head, okay, that's how I knew that. Having a think aloud and showing the students, verbally or on the board, how that context clue allowed you to make meaning of whatever it is that you read and transferring that to them. Discussion techniques, I kind of talked about that on the previous slide, but there's just so many things. Fishbowl discussions and Socratic seminars and just simple things, again, like the turn and talk. There's so many different discussion techniques, but this can help build comprehension. So say you're doing these things whole class and you notice that some students are still not progressing at the level that you want them to progress at. Students who need additional support may need small group instruction on these strategies. And so this is you pulling a small group and giving them direct and explicit instruction. So if we're using the example of writing a summary, we can say, okay, we're pulling them, I have my 4 students in my small group, and I need to explicitly outline the summarizing procedure again. I need to say, okay, guys, step 1 is this in writing a summary, step 2, step 3, step 4. I'm going to read a little piece of text. I'm going to model using that process. I'm going to ask questions to gauge understanding of the process. And then I'm going to use some gradual release and allow them to do it, in a group and then eventually individually while constantly offering that feedback. But this is going to allow those students who need more support. It's going to really help build their competency within those different areas because they need that direct and explicit instruction. So what are some next steps? Say that you're pulling your small group of 4 students and you notice, man, they're really still not progressing at all within this skill. Some next steps may be that you need to just refer the student to your school's administration or SBLC team if you have one on campus. And very little or no progress in reading comprehension could indicate, that students need help with word recognition skills, such as decoding or phonics skills, or even phonemic awareness skills. So just basic letter sounds. So meeting with your school's administration or SBLC team can help take that next step in getting the students the support that they need. So some final thoughts. Reading comprehension is a very complex process that requires a lot from our cognitive load. There's a lot happening in our brains as we read and comprehend. There is no one size fits all approach that will build reading comprehension in all students. However, and this is the exciting part, there are many things that we can do to build competency in reading comprehension. And sometimes these little moves and just more support and more practice really gives the students the upper hand they need to become more proficient and builds their confidence, and it leads to more reading, which helps build all those upper strands to the rope again. They're seeing more content, so they're building their background knowledge in different areas. They're building their vocabulary. So it's just very exciting. So I want you to think about an upcoming lesson, and I want you to think about what can you do whole class through the curriculum that will enhance students' reading comprehension. If we go back 2 slides, what are some different things that you think you could do? And start simple. Start with something you think just would be really easy to insert, maybe a question or 2, maybe those context clues. But think about also too what need your class has, and they might really, you notice, be really proficient with using context clues to make meaning, but maybe they really struggle to create a summary and to restate what's happening in the story or text. So think about that. Now consider any time you may have for small groups. And I recognize that this in 6-12 is probably going to predominantly happen if you do get the opportunity in an English language arts class. But if you have any intervention time at all, I want you to think about what skill do you want to focus on to build reading comprehension for those that need that additional support. What skill? And again, we go back to this slide. There's other skills, but these are some main ones that you can use to help build. What materials might you still need? And so as you're engaging and thinking about these questions, if you come up with materials that you do still need and something that we can do as a department to put out there for you, then I would love to hear about that. I have our contact information coming up. Or if you think of other skills that we need to have more resources around, I'd love to hear that as well. But I just really encourage you to just think about putting a little piece of this into your lessons. You're going to see the payout. It's going to be exciting. So if you have any questions or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us at louisianaliteracy@la.gov. And I look forward to hearing from y'all and seeing you in the next session.